Ophelia Sanders turned 30 alone in her studio, surrounded by fabric and unfulfilled dreams, until a black luxury car pulled up outside. Hudson Ashford stepped out, flanked by bodyguards. Her childhood best friend had returned after 12 years to remind her of a marriage pact they made. She thought it was a joke, but he was dead serious. "Welcome back, my lovely family. Thank you so much for all the sweet comments and likes on every post. Thank you for trusting this channel. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from." Ophelia Sanders stood alone in her studio, surrounded by the soft glow of string lights. The space was small but hers, every fabric swatch and sketch pinned to the walls a testament to late nights and relentless hope. 30 years old today. She'd imagined this milestone differently. More success, more stability, maybe someone to share it with. Instead, she had a studio that barely broke even, a landlord who kept raising her rent, and a birthday cake she'd eat alone later. She reached for her phone, scrolling through birthday messages. Sweet, but hollow. The kind of attention that made loneliness feel louder. And then, like it always did on nights like this, her mind drifted back to him. Hudson Ashford. They'd been sitting on the bleachers at the football field, caps and gowns discarded beside them. Hudson had been quieter than usual, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon, like he was trying to memorize it. "What if we're both still single at 30, he'd said, his voice low and serious, in a way that didn't match the lightness of the question. Ophelia had laughed, nudging him with her shoulder. "Then we're clearly doing something wrong." But Hudson hadn't laughed. He'd turned to her, his gaze steady and unnerving. "I'm serious, Ophelia. If we're both still single at 30, we get married." She'd thought he was joking, some weird coping mechanism for the fear of leaving behind everything they knew. So, she'd agreed, shaking his hand like they were sealing a business deal, still smiling because it felt absurd and harmless. "Deal," she'd said. What she hadn't realized then was that Hudson Ashford didn't make jokes, not about things that mattered to him. Ophelia shook her head, forcing herself back to the present. That pact had been a teenage fantasy. Promises made at 18 didn't hold weight at 30. She was getting ready to tidy up when she heard it, an engine outside. Through the window, she watched as a black luxury car stopped at the curb. Her heart kicked against her ribs. The back door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit. 2 bodyguards flanked him, their expressions unreadable as they scanned the street. But it was the man in the middle who made her breath catch. Hudson. He wasn't the boy she remembered. In his place stood someone who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, all sharp jawlines and controlled power. He walked toward the studio, and Ophelia's pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to move, to say something, but her body wouldn't cooperate. All she could do was watch as he pushed open the door, the little bell above it chiming like this was a normal evening and not the moment her carefully constructed world tilted sideways. "Hello, Ophelia," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered, smooth and certain. His eyes locked onto hers, dark and unreadable. "I'm here to collect." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her brain scrambled to make sense of this. Hudson Ashford, standing in her studio on her 30th birthday, looking like he owned the world. He stepped closer, and that's when she noticed it. The faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth, the same one that used to make her stomach flip when they were younger. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over her in a way that felt both familiar and entirely new. "Look at me," he said, his voice dropping lower, almost playful. "I've gone to the gym. Got the muscles now. The abs." He paused, his smile widening just enough to be devastating. "Still have that smile you always loved." Ophelia's throat tightened. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of fever dream brought on by too much work and not enough sleep. Hudson reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black box, placing it on the counter. "What?" she started, but he cut her off, his expression shifting. "You made me a promise, Ophelia," he said quietly, his gaze never leaving hers. "And I always keep mine." She stared at him, at the ring box sitting between them like a grenade with the pin pulled, and realized with crystal clarity that Hudson Ashford hadn't forgotten. Not for a single day. And now he was here, on her 30th birthday, to make sure she didn't forget either. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a business card, setting it beside the ring box with deliberate precision. "You have 48 hours to decide," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made her skin prickle. Then he leaned in just enough that she could feel the warmth of him, close enough that her breath hitched despite herself. "But make no mistake, Ophelia, I don't make jokes about promises." He straightened, his gaze holding hers for one more unbearable moment before he turned and walked out. The bell above the door chimed softly as he left, and through the window, she watched him slide into the back of that black luxury car. The engine purred to life, and then he was gone, leaving her standing there with a ring box, a business card, and a head full of questions she didn't know how to answer. Ophelia didn't move for a long time. She just stared at the card, at the embossed name and number that felt like a lifeline and a trap all at once. Hudson Ashford hadn't been joking, and somehow she'd always known. Hours later, at her apartment, she found an envelope under her door. Inside were property records for her building. Owner, Hudson Ashford. Ophelia didn't sleep. By the time the sun rose, she'd made her decision. She wasn't going to let him corner her like this. She found the address on his business card easily enough. The building was in the heart of downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place that screamed money and power. "I'm here to see Hudson Ashford," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The guard raised an eyebrow. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll see me." She half expected to be escorted out, but the guard made a call, spoke quietly into his headset, and then nodded toward the elevators. "Penthouse, top floor." The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, the view dizzying in its scope. In the center of it all stood Hudson, his back to her, as he looked out over the skyline. "You came," he said without turning around, like he'd been expecting her. "You knew I would." Her voice was sharper than she intended, but she didn't care. She crossed the room, her footsteps loud against the hardwood floor. "You own my building, Hudson. What the hell is this?" He turned then, his expression unreadable, and gestured toward one of the chairs near his desk. "Sit." "I'm not sitting. I want answers." For a moment, he just looked at her, and she hated the way her pulse quickened under his gaze, the way her body reacted to him even when her mind was screaming at her to run. Then he nodded, almost to himself, and moved to his desk. He didn't open any drawers, didn't pull out files. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching her with that intensity that made it hard to breathe. "I bought your building 6 months ago," he said simply, his tone matter-of-fact. Her stomach twisted. "Why?" "Because you needed help, and I wanted to make sure I'd be there when you realized it." The words landed like ice water. "That's not help, Hudson. That's manipulation." "Call it what you want." His jaw tightened slightly, the only crack in his composure. "But here's the reality, Ophelia. Your lease expires in 30 days. Your landlord, who works for me now, won't renew it. And every month, it gets a little bit harder to keep your head above water." She felt the blood drain from her face. I'm offering you a way out." He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. "Marry me. I'll invest in your studio. I'll give you access to every connection I have in the fashion industry. I'll make sure you never have to worry about rent or loans, or any of the things that keep you up at night." Her hands clenched into fists. "How do you know what keeps me up at night?" "I've been keeping track of you, Ophelia." His voice was quieter now, but no less certain. "Making sure you're safe. Making sure you have what you need." "Keeping track?" The words tasted bitter. "You mean stalking." "I mean protecting." He said it like it was perfectly reasonable, perfectly normal. "I never stopped caring about you, not for a second." The confession should have felt romantic. Instead, it felt like a noose tightening around her neck. This was someone who had the kind of power that could reshape her life with a single decision. Someone who already had. "This is insane," she whispered. "This is a partnership." His gaze never wavered. "You get the resources to build your empire. I get the woman I've been waiting 12 years for. Everyone wins. Except I don't have a choice." Her voice broke on the last word. "You made sure of that." Hudson's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been regret if she didn't know better. "You always have a choice, Ophelia. You can walk away right now. Refuse me. See if you can save your studio on your own. And if I can't, then you'll lose everything." He stepped even closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, could feel the heat radiating off him. "Or you can accept my offer, sign a contract, become my wife, and I'll give you a world where you never have to fight alone again." Before she could respond, the door opened. A woman approached, beautiful in that cold, polished way. "Hudson," the woman said. "I didn't realize you had a guest." "Harper," Hudson said, his tone clipped. "This is Ophelia Sanders. Ophelia, this is Harper Clinton, my chief of staff." Harper's smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked at Ophelia the way someone might look at a stain on expensive fabric, with thinly veiled disdain and curiosity. "A pleasure." Her gaze flicked to Hudson, and her body angled toward him in a way that felt territorial, possessive. "Your 11 o'clock is waiting in the conference room." "Cancel it," Hudson said without looking at her. Harper's smile faltered. "Hudson, it's the Westfield acquisition. They've been waiting weeks for this meeting." "I said cancel it." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Harper's gaze snapped back to Ophelia, something cold and calculating flickering through her expression, before she masked it with a polite nod. "Of course." She turned on her heel and left, the door closing softly behind her. Ophelia didn't miss the way Harper had looked at Hudson, the way her hand had lingered on the edge of his desk. There was history there, and Harper clearly didn't like being dismissed for Ophelia's sake. "She doesn't like me," Ophelia said, more to herself than to him. "She doesn't need to." Hudson's attention was back on her, his focus so intense it made her skin prickle. "This isn't about her. This is about us." "There is no us," Ophelia shot back, but the words felt hollow even as she said them. Hudson reached up, his fingers brushing a stray curl away from her face. The touch was gentle, deliberate, and it made her breath hitch despite everything. "Not yet," he murmured. "But there will be." He stepped back, putting distance between them that felt both like relief and loss. "You have 48 hours, Ophelia. Refuse me, and your lease expires in 30 days. Your studio closes. Everything you've built disappears." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Accept, and I'll make you untouchable." She wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him that this wasn't love, this was coercion, control dressed up in expensive suits and promises of protection. But her studio was dying. Her dreams were slipping through her fingers, and Hudson Ashford was offering her a lifeline, even if it came with chains attached. 48 hours, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "The clock is ticking. Pookie." The nickname, one he'd used years ago when they were just kids figuring out the world, hit her harder than it should have. It reminded her that beneath the billionaire exterior was the boy who used to sit beside her in the library, who'd made her laugh when she was stressed about exams, who'd promised her the world if she'd just wait for him. She thought he was joking then, too. She turned and walked toward the elevator, her head held high. When the elevator doors closed, she finally let herself breathe. 48 hours to decide, and she was actually considering it. 2 days later, Ophelia found herself back in his penthouse. She was tired of fighting, tired of scraping by, and Hudson was offering her a way out. She stood across from him, arms crossed, jaw set. He looked calm as ever, sitting behind his desk like he had all the time in the world, like he already knew how this would end. "I'll do it," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. But I have conditions. Hudson's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest, maybe. Or victory. I'm listening. 3 months, she said firmly. A trial engagement. If it doesn't work, we walk away. No strings, no consequences. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. No. The single word hit her like a slap. What do you mean, no? I mean no. He stood, moving around the desk with that predatory grace that made her pulse jump. I don't do halfway, Ophelia. Full marriage or nothing. I'm not interested in playing house for 3 months just so you can convince yourself this won't work. You can't be serious. You're asking me to marry you, and you won't even give me a trial period? I gave you 12 years, he said quietly. I'm not waiting any longer. She wanted to scream at him, but the way he was looking at her, with that unshakable certainty, made her wonder if maybe she was the insane one for even considering it. Fine, she said finally, the word coming out sharper than she intended. But I want to see the contract first. Every clause, every detail. I'm not signing anything blind. Hudson's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, and he gestured toward the leather folder sitting on his desk. I expected nothing less. She picked it up, flipping through the pages with a scrutiny that would have made her high school debate coach proud. Most of it was standard: financial arrangements, property rights, confidentiality agreements. But then she saw it, buried in the middle of page 7, a clause that made her blood run cold. All business decisions regarding Ophelia Sanders' studio, including but not limited to financial investments, vendor contracts, and creative direction, shall require prior approval from Hudson Ashford. Her hands tightened on the folder. You've got to be kidding me. Hudson tilted his head, his expression unreadable. It's a standard protection clause. I'm investing a significant amount of money into your business. I need to ensure that you control every move I make. She cut him off, her voice sharp with anger. That I can't make a single decision without running it by you first? That's not what this is. That's exactly what this is. She slammed the folder down on the desk, the sound echoing through the room. You want a wife, Hudson, not a puppet. This clause goes, or I walk. The silence that followed was suffocating. Hudson's jaw tightened, and for the first time since she'd walked in, she saw something crack in that controlled exterior. He moved closer, closing the distance between them until she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, until she could feel the heat radiating off him. You don't get to make demands, he said, his voice low and dangerous. And you don't get to own me. She didn't back down, didn't let herself flinch, even though her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. I'm agreeing to marry you, to let you into my life. But I'm not giving up who I am. If you can't accept that, then we're done here. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them crackled with tension, with all the things they weren't saying, with the push and pull of two people who refused to bend. And then, slowly, Hudson reached for the folder. He pulled out a pen, flipped to page 7, and with a single deliberate stroke, crossed out the clause. You're the only person who's ever made me compromise, he said quietly, his eyes locked on hers. Don't make me regret it. Ophelia's breath hitched. There was something raw in his voice, something vulnerable that didn't match the ruthless billionaire standing in front of her. She didn't know what to do with that, didn't know how to reconcile the boy she used to know with the man he'd become. Sign it, he said, holding out the pen. Her hand trembled as she took it. This was it, the point of no return. Once she signed this contract, there wasn't going back. She'd be Hudson Ashford's wife, bound to him in ways she didn't fully understand yet. But she'd also have a future, a chance to build something real without the constant fear of losing it all. She signed her name. Hudson set the folder aside and pulled out the ring box. He opened it, and her breath caught. The ring was stunning, an emerald-cut diamond set in platinum, vintage and elegant. It caught the light, and for a moment all she could do was stare. I bought this when I turned 25, Hudson said, his voice softer now, almost reverent. "I've been waiting 5 years to put it on you." The words hit her harder than they should have, and she felt something shift in her chest, something she didn't have a name for. He took her hand, and the simple touch sent electricity racing up her arm made her skin feel too tight, and her heart beat too fast. His thumb stroked the inside of her wrist, slow and deliberate, and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but feel. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. Hudson didn't do anything halfway. "There," he murmured, his eyes meeting hers. "Now it's real." Ophelia stared at the ring, at the way it caught the light, at the physical proof that she'd just agreed to marry a man who'd spent 12 years obsessing over a promise she'd forgotten. She opened her mouth to say something. She didn't know what. But then she caught movement in her peripheral vision. Harper stood in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral, but Ophelia didn't miss the way her hands clenched at her sides, the way her jaw tightened as she watched Hudson holding Ophelia's hand. "The contracts are ready for filing," Harper said, her voice clipped and professional, but there was an edge to it that made Ophelia's skin prickle. "Good," Hudson said without looking at her. "That'll be all?" Harper's gaze lingered on Ophelia for a moment longer, something cold and calculating flickering through her eyes before she turned and walked away. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the tension in the room shifted. Hudson's hand was still wrapped around Ophelia's, his thumb still tracing lazy circles on her wrist, and she hated how much she liked it, how much she wanted him to keep touching her. He leaned in, close enough that she could smell his cologne, close enough that his breath ghosted across her cheek. "You're mine now," he said, his voice dropping to something dark and possessive that sent a shiver down her spine. "That means nobody touches you but me." The words should have terrified her, should have made her run for the door and never look back. But instead, they made something warm and dangerous curl in her stomach, made her wonder what it would feel like to belong to someone so completely. She pulled her hand away, needing distance, needing space to think. "I should go." Hudson didn't stop her this time. He just watched as she gathered her things, as she moved toward the elevator, his eyes tracking her every movement. "Ophelia," he called, just as the elevator doors were about to close. She looked up, met his gaze across the distance. "Welcome to the family, Pookie." The doors closed, and she was alone with her racing heart and the ring on her finger that felt like both a promise and a prison. She'd just sold her soul to save her dreams, and the terrifying part was, she wasn't sure she regretted it. The engagement announcement went live 3 days later. Her phone blew up with notifications. Everyone wanted to know about the mysterious billionaire. Then the bell above her studio door chimed. Sean Walsh. Her stomach dropped. He looked the same as he had 2 years ago. Sandy blonde hair. That easy smile that used to make her feel special before she realized it was a weapon. "Ophelia," he said, his voice warm and familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. "Wow, you look amazing." She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Sean stepped closer. "I saw the announcement," he said, gesturing toward the ring on her hand. "You're engaged. To Hudson Ashford? That's none of your business." His smile faltered, and something darker flickered across his face. "We were together for 3 years. You don't think I deserve to know? You need to leave. I just want to talk." He moved closer, and she stepped back instinctively, her hip bumping against the counter. "I still care about you, Ophelia." Her chest tightened, old wounds tearing open. She could still hear his voice in her head. The things he used to say when he was angry. "You're too sensitive. No one else is going to put up with you the way I do. You should be grateful I even bother." He'd made her feel like she was the problem, like everything that went wrong was her fault, like she was lucky he tolerated her at all. "You need to leave," she said again, her voice shaking now. "Right now." Sean's expression hardened. "You think you're better than me now? Because you landed some rich guy? You're still the same girl, Ophelia. You're still... Is there a problem here?" The voice was cold, lethal, and it cut through the air like a blade. Ophelia's head snapped toward the door, and her breath caught. Hudson stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway, his dark eyes locked on Sean with a look that could have frozen fire. He was dressed in a suit, perfectly tailored as always, but there was nothing polished about the energy radiating off him. He looked dangerous. Sean turned, his confidence wavering for just a second before he plastered on a smile. "And you must be the fiancé, Sean Walsh." He held out his hand, but Hudson didn't take it. Instead, Hudson stepped into the studio, his gaze never leaving Sean, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You need to leave." Sean's smile faded. "Excuse me." "You heard me." Hudson's voice was calm, quiet, but there was a steel edge to it that made Ophelia's pulse race. "Get out." "Look, man, I'm just here to talk to Ophelia. This doesn't concern you." Hudson moved faster than Ophelia expected. One moment he was standing near the door, and the next he was right in front of Sean, close enough that Sean had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. Hudson didn't touch him, didn't raise his voice, but the threat was unmistakable. "It concerns me," Hudson said quietly, "because she's mine, and you're making her uncomfortable. So I'm going to give you one chance to walk out of here on your own. If you don't, I'll make sure you regret it." Sean's face flushed, anger flashing in his eyes, but he wasn't stupid enough to push it. He glanced at Ophelia, then back at Hudson, and whatever he saw there made him take a step back. "This isn't over," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Hudson leaned in, his voice dropping so low that Ophelia couldn't hear what he said, but whatever it was made Sean's face go pale. Then Hudson stepped aside, his arm gesturing toward the door in a mockery of politeness. Sean didn't look at Ophelia again. He just turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Ophelia's hands were shaking, her breath coming in short gasps, and she felt like the walls were closing in. She'd worked so hard to move past Sean, to rebuild herself after he'd spent 3 years tearing her down. But seeing him again had brought it all crashing back. The fear, the self-doubt, the feeling that maybe she really was too much, too difficult, too broken for anyone to love. "Ophelia." Hudson's voice was softer now, and when she looked up, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or something deeper. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but her voice cracked, and she knew he didn't believe her. He crossed the room in 2 strides, and before she could protest, he pulled her into his arms. She stiffened at first, her instinct still screaming at her to protect herself, but then his hand slid up to cradle the back of her head, and something inside her broke. She collapsed against his chest, her fingers clutching at his jacket as the tears came, hot and angry and unstoppable. "I won't cage you," Hudson murmured against her hair, his voice low and steady. "I won't control you or make you feel small. I'll worship you, Ophelia, the way you deserve." She didn't know if she believed him, didn't know if she could trust anyone after Sean, but in that moment, with his arms around her and his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, she wanted to. God, she wanted to. Hudson pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. He opened his arms slightly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Come here, Pookie," he said softly, his tone lighter now, trying to pull her out of the darkness. "Let Poppy make it better." Despite everything, despite the tears still streaming down her face, a laugh bubbled up in her chest. It was shaky and broken, but it was real. She let him pull her back in, let herself sink into the warmth of him, into the safety she hadn't felt in so long. Then he pressed a kiss to her forehead, slow and deliberate, and when he spoke again, his voice was darker, edged with a promise that sent a shiver down her spine. "But I will destroy anyone who made you afraid." The words should have scared her, should have been a warning sign that Hudson's obsession went deeper than she'd realized, but instead, they made her feel protected, cherished, like someone finally saw the parts of her that Sean had tried to break and decided they were worth fighting for. She stayed in his arms for a long time, letting herself be held, letting herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe Hudson Ashford was exactly what she needed, even if he was also exactly what she should fear. When she finally pulled away, wiping at her eyes, Hudson was still watching her with that intensity that made her feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "How did you know to come here?" His expression didn't change. "I always know where you are, Ophelia. I told you. I'm keeping track." The admission should have sent her running, should have reminded her that Hudson's love came with surveillance, with control, with an obsession that had no boundaries. But right now, with the memory of Sean's voice still echoing in her head and Hudson's warmth still wrapped around her, all she felt was grateful. And that terrified her most of all. The engagement celebration gala was Harper's idea. Ophelia found out through an elegantly printed invitation that arrived at her studio 3 days after Sean's visit. She should have been consulted. But when she called Hudson to ask about it, his response was maddeningly casual. "Harper's handling the details," he'd said, his voice distracted in that way that told her he was working on something else while they talked. "She's good at these things. You don't need to worry about it." But Ophelia did worry, because being left out of planning her own engagement party felt like a message, and she was pretty sure she knew who was sending it. The gala was held at one of the city's most exclusive venues. Ophelia arrived in a gown she'd designed, herself. Deep sapphire silk that made the emerald on her hand catch the light. The space was packed with everyone who mattered. Harper was there too, directing staff with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. When Harper saw Ophelia, her smile was polite, practiced, and didn't reach her eyes. "Ophelia," Harper said, her tone warm in a way that felt like ice. "You look lovely." "Thank you." Ophelia glanced around the room, taking in the white roses and gold accents, the champagne tower already being assembled near the entrance. "Everything looks beautiful. I wish I'd been able to help with the planning." "Oh, I didn't want to burden you." Harper's smile never wavered. "I know how busy you are with your studio. Besides, Hudson and I have worked together for so long, I know exactly what he likes." The words landed like a carefully placed knife. Ophelia forced herself to keep her expression neutral, but inside, something twisted. "I know exactly what he likes." The implication was clear. Harper knew Hudson in ways Ophelia didn't, had history with him that Ophelia would always be outside of. "Right," Ophelia said. "Well, if there's anything I can do now?" "Actually, everything's under control." Harper's gaze swept over her, assessing. "You should probably go get ready. Guests will be arriving soon, and you'll want to look your best." It was a dismissal, clear and deliberate. Ophelia felt her jaw tighten but didn't know this world well enough yet to push back. So she nodded and left to find the dressing room, Harper's words echoing in her head. "I know exactly what he likes." By the time the gala started, Ophelia had forced herself into the right headspace. She wore her dress like armor, smiled at strangers, and tried not to notice how Harper seemed to be everywhere, hovering at Hudson's elbow, laughing at his comments, her hand finding reasons to touch his arm, his shoulder, the edge of his desk, during conversations. An hour into the gala, during a lull in the festivities, Harper found her. Ophelia had stepped away from the crowd, seeking a moment of quiet near the balcony overlooking the city. When Harper appeared beside her, with 2 glasses of champagne. "Here," Harper said, offering one to Ophelia. "You look like you could use this." Ophelia hesitated, then took the glass. "Thanks." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party muffled behind them. The city lights stretched out before them, beautiful and distant. Then Harper spoke, her voice casual, almost friendly. "You know, Hudson and I dated in college." Ophelia's hand tightened around the glass. "He didn't mention that." Harper laughed softly. "He wouldn't. Hudson's not one to dwell on the past. But we were together for almost 2 years. I thought we were going to get married, actually." The words hit Ophelia harder than they should have, and she hated herself for it. She kept her gaze fixed on the city lights beyond the balcony, refusing to let Harper see how much the revelation stung. "What happened?" Ophelia asked, her voice carefully neutral. Harper shrugged, taking a sip of her champagne. He changed, became obsessed with building his empire, with proving himself. I couldn't compete with that kind of ambition. Eventually, I realized I was just another piece on his chessboard. She turned to look at Ophelia, her blue eyes sharp and assessing. "He'll get bored, you know. Once the novelty wears off. You're a project to him, Ophelia, not a partner." Ophelia's chest tightened, but she forced herself to meet Harper's gaze. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Harper's smile was pitying now, and somehow that was worse than anger would have been. "I've known Hudson for over 5 years. I've seen him close deals, destroy competitors, build empires. And the one thing I've learned is that he always gets what he wants. But once he has it," she paused, letting the words sink in, "he moves on." Before Ophelia could respond, Harper's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked back at Ophelia with that same infuriating smile. "Excuse me," Harper said. "Hudson needs me." She walked away, leaving Ophelia standing alone on the balcony, her mind racing with doubt and fear and anger all twisted together. She wanted to dismiss Harper's words as jealousy, as the bitter resentment of an ex-girlfriend who couldn't let go. But the seed had been planted, and over the next few days, Ophelia found herself watching Hudson more closely. The closed-door meetings that ran long, the phone calls he took in another room, his voice too low for her to hear. The way he sometimes seemed distant, even when he was right next to her, his mind clearly somewhere else. Harper's words kept echoing in her head. "You're a project to him, not a partner." Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She confronted him one evening in his penthouse, finding him at his desk, his attention buried in his laptop. "Hudson, we need to talk." He didn't look up. "Can it wait?" "I'm in the middle of something." "No, it can't wait." Her voice was sharper than she intended, and it finally made him pause. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" She crossed her arms, trying to keep her frustration in check. "You've been distracted for days. Mysterious meetings, phone calls you won't take in front of me. And Harper. His jaw tightened. "What did she say to you?" "It doesn't matter what she said." Ophelia stepped closer, her hands gripping the edge of his desk. "What matters is that I feel like I'm on the outside of my own engagement. You keep things from me, Hudson. You make decisions without me. And I'm starting to wonder if Harper was right. Am I just a project to you?" Hudson stood, his chair scraping against the floor, and for a moment, she thought he was going to get angry. But instead, he rounded the desk, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat of him, until she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You think I'm keeping things from you because you're a project?" His voice was low, dangerous, but there was something else beneath it, something that might have been hurt. "Ophelia, I'm keeping things from you because there are parts of my world that would terrify you, parts I'm trying to protect you from. I don't need you to protect me. I need you to be honest with me." His eyes searched hers, and then, unexpectedly, his expression shifted. The corner of his mouth curved into a faint smile, and he reached out to tuck a curl behind her ear. "Are you jealous, Pookie?" he asked, his tone shifting, lighter now, almost teasing. "I like it." Her face flushed, anger and embarrassment warring inside her. "Don't Pookie me right now, Hudson. I'm serious." "So am I." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Harper doesn't matter. Those meetings, those calls, they're all for you. To make sure you're safe, to make sure our future is secure. But if you need me to be more transparent, I'll try." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But there was still something in his eyes, something he wasn't saying, and it made her chest ache with uncertainty. "Okay," she said finally, her voice softer now. "Just don't shut me out." "I won't." he promised, and he kissed her forehead, the gesture so achingly tender it made her want to cry. But later that night, after Hudson had fallen asleep, Ophelia found herself unable to rest. Harper's words haunted her. "You're a project, not a partner." The doubt had taken root, and no amount of reassurance could shake it loose. She wandered through the penthouse, restless and searching for something she couldn't name. And that's when she saw it, his office door slightly ajar, the filing cabinet in the corner catching the moonlight streaming through the windows. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But her feet carried her forward anyway, and before she could second-guess herself, she was standing in front of the cabinet, her hand on the drawer. Just one look, she told herself, just to put her mind at ease. She pulled the drawer open, and her world tilted on its axis. Her hands shook as she pulled the file from the drawer. Ophelia acquisition plan dated 5 years ago. Her stomach dropped. Acquisition. Like she was a business deal. Her fingers opened the folder, and the first thing she saw made her breath catch. A photograph. Of her. But not recent. This was from 5 years ago. She could tell by her hair. Shorter then. By the vintage jacket she'd sold at a thrift store 3 years back to make rent. She was walking down the street, coffee in hand, completely unaware that someone was watching. That someone was documenting her existence like a specimen under glass. Her hands trembled as she flipped through more pages, more photos, dozens of them. Her at her studio, laughing with a client. Her at a coffee shop, head bent over her sketchbook. Her walking home in the rain, hair plastered to her face. Candid shots spanning years, a timeline of surveillance she'd never known existed. But it was the documents beneath the photos that made her knees buckle. The file detailed a 2-phase plan spanning 5 years. Phase 1 was to manufacture financial pressure through anonymous complaints, delay shipments, and plant negative reviews. Phase 2 was to facilitate loan rejections, acquire her competitors, and finally purchase her building 6 months before her 30th birthday. Complete leverage. She couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was seeing. This wasn't just surveillance. This wasn't just watching from afar to make sure she was safe. This was orchestration, manipulation. He hadn't just tracked her struggles, he'd caused them. Every roadblock, every rejection, every night she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering why she couldn't catch a break. It had all been Hudson. He'd sabotaged her life so thoroughly that his rescue would feel like salvation instead of the trap it actually was. The pages slipped from her hands, scattering across his desk, across the floor, evidence of a conspiracy she'd been too blind to see. Her vision blurred with tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. "Ophelia." The voice came from the doorway, and she spun around. Hudson stood there in nothing but sleep pants, his hair disheveled, his eyes immediately taking in the open filing cabinet, the scattered papers, the file folder with her name on it lying open on his desk. His expression didn't change, didn't show surprise or guilt or anything that might have made this easier to process. He just looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes and said calmly, "You had no right to go through my files." The sheer audacity of it, the fact that he was accusing her of violating trust, made something inside her snap. "You had no right?" Her voice came out shrill, broken, all the hurt and betrayal rising up like a tidal wave. "You sabotaged my life. She gestured wildly at the papers, at the evidence of his obsession, at 5 years of calculated manipulation. "You manufactured my struggles to force me to need you." Hudson stepped into the room, and she took an instinctive step back, her hip hitting the edge of his desk. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Hudson?" She was shouting now, past caring who heard, past caring about anything except the betrayal burning through her veins. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you spent 5 years systematically destroying everything I tried to build, so I'd be desperate enough to agree to marry you. I created obstacles." His voice was still controlled, still calm, and that made it worse somehow. Made it clear this was calculated, intentional, not some mistake he could apologize away. Challenges you could overcome with the right support. I made sure you'd need me, yes, but I also made sure I'd be there when you did. That's not love, she was screaming now, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. That's psychotic. You don't get to play God with someone's life and call it romance. I created the problem so I could be your solution. His voice rose to match hers, the first real crack in his composure, and she saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. And I'd do it again. Every single time. The admission, the absolute lack of remorse, hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, at this man she'd thought she was starting to know, and realized she didn't know him at all, didn't know what he was capable of, didn't know how far his obsession truly went. You're obsessed, she whispered, backing toward the door. Yes. He moved closer, and there was something wild in his eyes now, something raw and desperate that had been hidden beneath the polished billionaire exterior. Completely. I have been since I was 18 years old, and we made a promise. A promise you laughed off, but I held on to like a lifeline. We were kids, Hudson. Her voice broke on his name. That promise didn't mean, it meant everything to me. His voice echoed through the office, bouncing off the walls, and she'd never seen him like this. Unraveled, desperate, human in a way that was both terrifying and heartbreaking. You were everything to me. And when you walked away after graduation, when you didn't look back, I knew I had to become someone worthy of you. Someone you couldn't ignore. Someone you'd need. Ophelia's chest heaved, tears still streaming down her face, and she could see it now. The 18-year-old boy who'd watched her leave, who'd taken a joke and turned it into an obsession that had shaped 12 years of his life. She could see the pain beneath the manipulation, the twisted love that had driven him to build an empire and tear down her life in equal measure. But that didn't make it right, didn't make it forgivable. So you ruined me instead, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I gave you a reason to come back to me. He was standing right in front of her now, so close she could see the anguish in his dark eyes, the years of wanting carved into every line of his face. I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not going to pretend I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I wanted you, Ophelia. I've always wanted you. And I did what I had to do to make sure I didn't lose you. She couldn't listen to this anymore. Couldn't stand here and let him justify what he'd done. Like it was some grand romantic gesture instead of the violation it was. She moved toward the door, needing to get out, needing air and space and distance from the wreckage of everything she thought was real. But Hudson was faster. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path, his hand braced against the doorframe in a way that made her feel caged. Move, she said, her voice shaking. No, Hudson, I swear to God, you don't get to walk away from this. Not after I've spent years building a life around the promise of you. That's your problem, not mine. She tried to push past him, but he caught her wrist, and suddenly they were too close, the tension crackling between them. You made a promise, he said, his voice dropping to something dark and raw. You shook my hand and agreed that if we were both single at 30, we'd get married. I built my entire life around that promise. I became someone worthy of you. I created an empire so you'd never want for anything, and you don't get to walk away from that just because you don't like my methods. You're insane, she whispered, but her body betrayed her, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs, heat flooding through her despite everything. Maybe. His free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. But I'm your kind of insane, Ophelia. I always have been. He leaned in, and for one breathless, terrible moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. Worse, she thought she might let him. His lips were inches from hers, his breath warm against her skin, and every rational thought in her head was screaming at her to move, to run, to get away from this man who'd proven he'd do anything to keep her. But then something inside her snapped, fury and want and betrayal all colliding, and she didn't know who moved first. It didn't matter. His mouth crashed against hers, or hers against his, and it was brutal, desperate. All the rage and fear and twisted desire they'd been holding back exploding in the space between them. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and her fingers dug into his bare shoulders hard enough to leave marks. She kissed him back with everything she had, anger and hurt and a hunger she didn't want to name. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't sweet. It was a claiming and a punishment, a surrender and a rebellion all at once. She tasted salt, her tears or his, she couldn't tell, and felt his heart hammering against her chest as hard as her own. His body pressed her back against the doorframe, solid and overwhelming, and she hated how much she wanted this, how much her body betrayed every logical thought screaming at her to stop. His thumb traced her jaw, his other hand sliding to her waist, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. She felt the desperation in every movement. The 12 years of obsession and longing poured into this one moment. And God help her, she was giving it back, kissing him with a ferocity that matched his own, her fingers threading through his hair, pulling him closer, even as her mind screamed that this was wrong, that she should be running, that this man had destroyed her life and she was kissing him like he was oxygen. And then reality crashed back in. The file, the photos, the calculated destruction of everything she'd worked for, the admission that he'd do it all again without hesitation. She shoved him, hard, used every ounce of strength she had to push against his chest, and he stumbled back, surprise flickering across his face for just a second before the heat returned. "No," she gasped, her lips swollen, her whole body trembling. "We can't. I can't." She ran, didn't think, didn't plan, just turned and fled down the hallway, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors, her vision blurred with tears. She heard him call her name, heard his footsteps behind her, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. She made it to the elevator, her fingers jabbing frantically at the button, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The doors slid open. Thank God, thank God. And she threw herself inside, hitting the button for the lobby over and over until the doors finally began to close. The last thing she saw was Hudson standing in the hallway, his chest heaving, his hair disheveled from her fingers, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her feel like she was burning from the inside out. Like even now, even after everything, he was holding her with nothing but his gaze. Then the doors closed, and she was alone, sliding down to sit on the elevator floor, her whole body shaking, the taste of him still on her lips, and the ring on her finger feeling like a shackle she'd never be free of. She'd just kissed the man who'd sabotaged her life. And the most terrifying part was how much she'd wanted to keep going. Ophelia spent the first 3 days back in her apartment, trying to convince herself she'd made the right decision. She should have felt relieved, free. Instead, she just felt hollow. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Hudson called 17 times the first day, 23 the second. She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Every time she saw his name on the screen, she remembered that file, those photographs, the clinical precision with which he'd dismantled her life to rebuild it in his image. She'd blocked his number by day 3, but somehow she knew that wouldn't stop him. Hudson Ashford didn't accept defeat. She threw herself into work, trying to lose herself in fabric swatches and design sketches, trying to pretend her world wasn't falling apart. And that's when everything got worse. The text messages arrived on a Thursday afternoon from a number she didn't recognize. No greeting, no explanation, just screenshots. The first one showed a text, conversation between 2 people labeled only as H and unknown contact. Unknown contact. She's more trouble than she's worth. When are you planning to cut her loose? H. After the merger closes. I need her compliant until then. Unknown contact. And the studio investment? H. Minimal. Just enough to keep her satisfied. The ROI is in the optics, not the business. Ophelia's hands went numb. She scrolled to the next screenshot, her vision blurring. H. The engagement serves its purpose. Once the Westfield acquisition is finalized, we can restructure the arrangement. Unknown what? You're sure she won't cause problems? H. She's manageable. Too emotionally invested to walk away now. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering on her work table. This couldn't be real. Even after the acquisition file, even after knowing what Hudson was capable of, this felt different. Felt colder. These weren't plans made 5 years ago when he was obsessed and desperate. These were recent. Current. Proof that his promises of partnership and transparency had been lies. Another message came through. This time, a photo. Hudson at a restaurant, leaning close to a beautiful brunette, his hand on her lower back, his smile the same one he'd given Ophelia 100 times. The caption read, "Business dinner last week. She doesn't know about the fiancé." Ophelia felt something shatter inside her chest. That night, there was a business dinner. Hudson had mentioned it days ago, before everything fell apart. Said it was investors and board members, nothing she needed to worry about. But he'd invited her anyway. Said it would be good for her to meet some of the people in his world. She'd planned to decline, still reeling from their confrontation, from the taste of him still lingering on her lips. But now, staring at those screenshots, at that photo of him with another woman, she made a different decision. She would go, and she would end this. The restaurant was exclusive, all dark wood and soft lighting, the kind of place where deals worth millions were made over wine that cost more than her monthly rent. Ophelia arrived late, her heart pounding, wearing the same emerald dress she'd worn to their engagement gala. She wanted him to see exactly what he was losing. A hostess led her to the private room, and when the doors opened, she saw him immediately. Hudson sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by men in expensive suits, and beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, was the brunette from the photo. She was beautiful, polished, professional. Everything Ophelia suddenly felt she wasn't. Hudson's eyes found Ophelia the moment she entered, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or concern. But before he could say anything, the brunette turned, following his gaze. "Oh," the woman said, her smile polite but curious. "You must be Ophelia. Hudson's mentioned you." She stood extending, her hand. "Amanda Cole. I'm heading up the tech acquisition Hudson's been working on." "Has he?" Ophelia's voice was ice, and she saw Hudson's jaw tighten, saw him start to rise from his chair. "Ophelia," he said carefully, his tone low and controlled. "I didn't think you were coming." Clearly. She didn't move from the doorway, didn't acknowledge the other men at the table who were watching the exchange with varying degrees of confusion and interest. Her eyes stayed locked on Hudson, on the man who'd spent 12 years manipulating her into this moment. "Can I speak with you? Privately?" Hudson nodded, excusing himself from the table, but Ophelia stopped him before he could reach her. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying through the room, "I think everyone should hear this." "Ophelia." His voice was low, a warning. "Whatever you think you know. I know you're using me." She pulled her phone from her clutch, held up, the screenshots for everyone to see, her hand remarkably steady despite the way her heart was shattering. "I know this engagement is just another business deal to you, that I'm a project you're managing until you don't need me anymore." The room went silent. Hudson's face went pale, then dark. "Where did you get those?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Does it matter?" She crossed the room now, each step deliberate, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the fury and something else, something that looked like betrayal, flashing in his dark eyes. "The studio investment is minimal. The ROI is in the optics. I'm manageable, emotionally invested enough not to walk away." She threw his own words back at him, watching them land like knives. "Did I get that right, Hudson?" His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Those messages are fabricated. Someone is trying to—" "Don't." The word came out, sharp, final. "Don't insult me by lying. Not now. Not after everything." She pulled the ring off her finger, the emerald that had felt like both a promise and a prison, and set it on the table in front of him. The sound of it hitting the wood echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. "This engagement is over," she said, her voice steady despite the tears burning behind her eyes. I won't be your acquisition, Hudson. I won't be another thing you own and discard when it's no longer profitable. She turned to walk out, head high, eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. Behind her, she heard chaos erupt, chairs scraping, voices rising, someone trying to salvage the business dinner she'd just destroyed. And then she heard it, the sound of glass shattering, something heavy hitting a wall, and Hudson's voice, colder than she'd ever heard it, cutting through the noise like a blade. Get out! Ophelia turned, saw through the open doorway as Hudson grabbed someone by the arm, not Amanda, not one of the investors. Harper. Harper, who'd been standing in the corner, who must have slipped in after Ophelia arrived. Harper, whose face had gone pale as Hudson's grip tightened on her arm, his fury barely contained. You did this, he said, his voice shaking with rage, with a loss of control she'd never seen in him. You fabricated those messages. You've been sabotaging her from the beginning. Harper's composure cracked, something desperate flashing across her face. She was never right for you. You were obsessed with some fantasy from 12 years ago, and I was trying to— You're fired. The words were final, absolute. Hudson released her arm like touching her disgusted him. Security will escort you out. If you ever contact Ophelia again, if you ever come near her, I will destroy everything you've built. Do you understand me? Harper's face went white, then red. She looked around the room at the investors and board members watching with expressions ranging from shock to uncomfortable fascination. Then her gaze found Ophelia, still standing in the doorway, and her lips curved into a cruel smile. It doesn't matter what you do to me, Harper said, her voice carrying. She'll never trust you, Hudson. You've already lost her. Then security was there, 2 men in dark suits flanking Harper, escorting her toward a different exit. She didn't resist, but she kept her head high, her expression triumphant even in defeat, like she'd won something more important than her job. The door closed behind her, and Hudson stood alone in the middle of the ruined dinner, his chest heaving, his perfectly styled hair disheveled, his suit jacket discarded somewhere in the chaos. The other men at the table were gathering their things, murmuring excuses, clearly wanting to be anywhere but here. And then his eyes met Ophelia's across the distance, and she saw devastation there. Hudson disappeared for 4 days. No calls, no texts, no black car outside her studio. The silence was somehow worse than his presence had ever been. She felt empty. The fashion blogs had retracted their stories. Apologies appeared everywhere, condemning the malicious campaign against her. Her phone rang nonstop with clients, press, and opportunities. Hudson's doing, even in his absence, still protecting her. On the 5th day, Ophelia found herself at his building. She told herself she was retrieving her things. But really, she just needed to understand the man who'd spent 12 years building himself around her. Security let her up without question. The penthouse was quiet, empty. She wandered through the rooms until she found herself drawn to his office. The filing cabinet was still there, and this time she didn't hesitate. She pulled open the drawer, looking for something. Closure, maybe, or confirmation that she'd made the right choice. What she found instead broke her heart. The files weren't the cold, clinical acquisition plans she'd seen before. These were different, personal, scattered, like someone had gone through them recently and left them in disarray. The first folder she pulled out was labeled simply, Letters. She opened it, and her hand started shaking. The first letter was dated 12 years ago, written on notebook paper. Dear Ophelia, you left for college today. I'm still here, watching you go, wondering if you remember the promise. You probably don't. It was just a joke to you, but it wasn't to me. It was the only thing keeping me going. I did 100 push-ups today. Wonder if you'd notice. Your future husband, Hudson. Ophelia's throat tightened. She flipped to the next letter, then the next, watching 12 years unfold in ink and paper. Dear Pookie, I made my first million today. The business partners wanted to celebrate, but all I could think about was you. About how one day I'll have enough to give you everything you deserve. Not because you need it, but because you deserve a world where you never have to compromise your art for survival. I bought my first building today. It's nothing compared to where I want to be, but it's a start. When I marry you, and I will marry you, I want to be able to give you everything. Still doing those push-ups. Got the abs now. Hope you'll like them. Letter after letter, chronicling his entire journey. Every success measured against whether it made him worthy of her. Every failure a step back from the promise he'd made to himself. She saw the obsession, yes, but she also saw the devotion. Twisted and excessive, but real. She found another folder. This one contained documentation of grants he'd funded anonymously, programs for emerging designers, scholarships for fashion students, small business loans with impossibly favorable terms. Her own name appeared in one of the files, a grant she'd received 2 years ago that had kept her afloat when she was first starting out. She'd never known where the money came from, had assumed it was just luck, good timing. It had been Hudson, protecting her even when she didn't know she needed protection. Another file contained incident reports, legal documents, restraining orders, all involving Sean. Ophelia's stomach dropped as she read through them. Evidence of Sean trying to contact her repeatedly after their breakup. Attempts to sabotage her early career that had mysteriously fallen apart. Threats that had been neutralized before they ever reached her. Hudson had been protecting her from Sean's revenge for years, and she'd never known. The last file was labeled, "For Ophelia." A business plan dated 8 years ago for a tech company focused on the fashion industry. The mission statement made her chest ache. To create a world where talented designers like Ophelia Sanders never have to compromise their vision. To make the fashion industry worthy of her. He'd built an empire specifically to create a space for her. Ophelia sank into his desk chair, surrounded by 12 years of evidence. His obsession wasn't just about control, it was about devotion. Twisted, but real. Her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something made her answer. Ophelia Sanders? The voice was professional, clipped. This is Miranda Cole from Fashion Forward magazine. I'm fact-checking a story we received about plagiarism allegations against you. Do you have a comment? Her blood ran cold. What allegations? We've been provided with emails suggesting that several of your signature designs were stolen from other artists. The source claims to have documentation proving that's not true. Ophelia's voice shook. Those emails are fabricated. This is another attempt to... We take these allegations very seriously, Ms. Sanders. If you can provide evidence to refute the claims, we'd be happy to... Who gave you these? Emails? But she already knew. Sean. It had to be Sean, making one final play to destroy her. I'm not at liberty to say. We'll be publishing the story tomorrow, unless you can provide substantial proof of... The line went dead. Ophelia stared at her phone, her heart pounding. This was worse than the stolen clients, worse than the blog posts. Plagiarism allegations could end her career permanently, could make sure she never worked in fashion again. And if Fashion Forward ran the story, every other outlet would pick it up within hours. She was still sitting there, paralyzed with fear, when she heard the elevator doors open. Hudson stepped into the penthouse, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, dark circles shadowing his eyes. But when his gaze found her sitting at his desk, surrounded by his letters, something shifted in his expression. Relief, raw and unguarded. You read them, he said quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He moved closer, his steps slow, like he was approaching something fragile that might shatter if he moved too fast. I never meant for you to see those. They were just... I needed somewhere to put all the things I couldn't say to you. Hudson, Sean is... Her voice broke. He's accusing me of plagiarism. Fashion Forward is running a story tomorrow. They have fabricated emails, documentation, and I don't know how to stop it. This will destroy everything. Something dark and dangerous flickered across Hudson's face. He pulled out his phone immediately, his voice crisp and commanding as he made a call. I need everything we have on Sean Walsh. Financial records, communications, every illegal thing he's ever done. I want it on my desk in an hour." He paused, his eyes never leaving Ophelia's face. "And contact Fashion Forward. Tell them if they run that story, we'll bury them in litigation so deep they'll never see daylight again." He ended the call and looked at Ophelia with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You want to see what I'm really capable of?" His voice was soft, lethal, edged with a promise that sent a shiver down her spine. "You're about to, because no one messes with my Pookie." The possessiveness in his voice should have made her angry, should have reminded her of all the reasons she'd walked away. But surrounded by 12 years of letters, of evidence that his obsession had always been mixed with something deeper, something that looked like love even when it was twisted beyond recognition, all she felt was safe, and that terrified her most of all. Hudson didn't just destroy Sean, he obliterated him. It took less than 48 hours. Hudson's team uncovered every lie Sean had ever told. The evidence was damning: fabricated credentials, embezzled funds, and proof that he'd manufactured the plagiarism emails with Harper. Fashion Forward issued a retraction and public apology. Other outlets followed, condemning Sean's actions. Hudson had her designs authenticated by industry experts and secured testimonials from clients and professors. By the time he was done, Ophelia's reputation wasn't just cleared, it was elevated. Opportunities flooded in, and Sean's career was in ashes. The industry had blacklisted him completely, his name synonymous with fraud and vindictiveness. The last Ophelia heard, he'd left the city entirely, fleeing the wreckage Hudson had left in his wake. She found Hudson 3 days after the story broke, standing in his penthouse by the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands in his pockets, silhouette dark against the afternoon light. He didn't turn when she entered, but she knew he'd heard her. "You destroyed him," she said quietly. "Yes." No apology, no justification, just simple acknowledgement. "You didn't have to go that far. The plagiarism story was already dead. You could have just—" He tried to ruin you. Hudson's voice was flat, controlled, but she heard the steel beneath it. "Twice. Once when you were with him, breaking you down until you questioned your own worth. And again now, trying to destroy everything you'd built. He doesn't get to walk away from that." Ophelia moved closer, studying his reflection in the glass. "Are you a good man or a monster, Hudson? Because sometimes I can't tell the difference." Finally, he turned to face her. The exhaustion was still there, carved into the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. But there was something else, too. Something raw and unguarded that made her chest ache. "I'm whatever you need me to be," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you need me to be gentle, I'll try. If you need me to be ruthless, I'll burn the world down for you without hesitation. I don't know if that makes me good or monstrous. I just know I'd do anything to keep you safe." The honesty in his words, the complete lack of pretense or manipulation, hit her harder than any declaration of love ever could. She'd seen the letters, the grants, the protection from Sean that had started years before. She'd even known she needed it. The empire built specifically to support artists like her. Hudson's methods were questionable, his obsession excessive, but his devotion was real. "I need to show you something," he said suddenly. "Will you come with me?" She should have said no. Should have kept her distance, protected herself from getting pulled back into his orbit. But instead, she found herself nodding. The car ride was silent. Ophelia watched the city give way to suburbs, then to the familiar streets of their hometown. Her heart pounded when she realized where they were going. The high school football field looked smaller than she remembered. The bleachers were rusted, but it was still recognizable, still the place where they'd made their promise. Hudson led her to the same spot, the middle of the bleachers where they'd sat that graduation night. The metal was cold beneath her, and she wrapped her arms around herself, memories flooding back with a vividness that stole her breath. "I never forgot," Hudson said quietly. "Not for a single day." "I thought it was sweet," she admitted. A safety net we'd never need. It was never a safety net for me. His voice was thick with emotion. It was hope, the only thing I had when you left, and I was still here. Ophelia turned to look at him and saw the boy she'd known beneath the billionaire's mask, the quiet kid who'd sat beside her in the library, who'd listened to her dreams about becoming a designer, who'd made her laugh when she was stressed about exams. You were the only person who just saw me, Hudson continued, and when we made that pact, I promised myself I'd become someone you'd never regret choosing. Hudson, I built everything for you. He turned to face her, and she saw tears tracking down his cheeks, the first time she'd ever seen him cry. The tech company, the real estate empire, the fashion industry connections, all of it was, so that when you came back to me, when that promise became real, I could give you a world where you'd never have to compromise, where you could create freely and never worry about money or validation or any of the things that had held you back. Her throat was so tight, she could barely breathe. I know I went about it wrong, he said, his voice breaking. The acquisition plan, the manufactured struggles, I know that was controlling and manipulative and probably unforgivable. But I was terrified, Ophelia. Terrified that if I just showed up at 30 and asked you to marry me, you'd laugh it off the way you did that first night. So I made myself necessary, made sure you needed me, even if you didn't want me. The pact was never about ownership, she whispered. No, he shook his head, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. It was about hope, about having something to work toward when everything felt impossible. You were my North Star, Ophelia. Every decision I made, every risk I took, it was all to become the kind of man you'd choose. Not because you promised to, but because you wanted to. She thought about the letters, the 12 years of devotion hidden in notebook paper and careful handwriting, the grants he'd funded anonymously, the protection from Sean she'd never known she needed. The empire built specifically to support artists like her. Hudson's methods were wrong, his obsession excessive, but the love beneath it all was real. Remember when you said I'd never get muscles? Hudson's voice was lighter now, trying to break through the heavy emotion. And despite everything, Ophelia felt a smile tug at her lips. He stood, and in a gesture that was both playful and vulnerable, lifted his shirt slightly, revealing the abs he'd mentioned that first night. The movement was careful, almost shy, so different from his usual confidence. Look at me now, Ophelia, he said, that devastating smile breaking through the tears. Got the muscles, got the abs, built a billion-dollar empire. His smile faded, replaced by something raw and honest. All for you. Still have the smile you always loved. A laugh bubbled up through her tears. You're an idiot. You're idiot. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his eyes searching hers. I've always been your idiot. The question is, can you forgive me for the way I loved you? For making it so complicated when it should have been simple? Ophelia looked at their joined hands, at the man who'd spent 12 years building himself into someone worthy of a teenage promise. He wasn't perfect. He was controlling and obsessive and willing to manipulate circumstances to get what he wanted. But he was also devoted and protective and capable of a kind of love most people only read about in books. I don't know if what we have is healthy, she said slowly, her voice shaking. I don't know if it's right or if it makes sense or if we're both just broken in compatible ways. Hudson's grip on her hands tightened, something like fear flashing across his face. But I know I don't want to be without you, she continued, and watched relief flood his expression. I know that despite everything, the manipulation, the control, the obsession, I've fallen in love with you, the boy who made me a promise, and the man who spent 12 years trying to keep it. Ophelia, she cupped his face, seeing the vulnerability in his dark eyes, the 12 years of longing and devotion and twisted love that had shaped everything he'd become. Then prove it, she whispered. Prove that this is about more than possession. Prove that you can love me without controlling me. Prove that the empire you built can be ours, instead of yours. How? His voice was desperate, raw, his hands coming up to cover hers. Tell me how, and I'll do it. She leaned forward, her forehead resting against his, breathing him in. Make me yours. Not because you manipulated circumstances, or because I had no choice, but because I'm choosing you. Right here, right now, with full knowledge of who you are and what you've done. Hudson's breath hitched. Are you sure? Because once I have you, Ophelia, I'm not letting go. Not ever. She answered by kissing him. It was different from the desperate clash in his office, different from the anger and fear that had fueled their last kiss. This was a choice, a surrender. And when Hudson's arms wrapped around her, pulling her against him like he was afraid she might disappear, she felt something inside her finally settle. Take me home, she whispered against his lips. The car ride back was torture. Hudson kept one hand on her thigh, while the other canceled meetings on his phone. Ophelia watched him and felt heat pool in her stomach. When they finally made it inside, Hudson backed her against the door, his eyes searching hers. Tell me you want this, he said. Tell me you're choosing me because you want me. I want you, she breathed. I've wanted you since you walked into my studio, maybe even since we were 18. His kiss was reverent this time, slow and deep, like he was savoring every second. His hand slid down her sides, learning the shape of her, and when he lifted her, her legs wrapping around his waist, she felt the full weight of 12 years of wanting in the way he held her. He carried her to his bedroom, and for a moment, he just looked at her. I've imagined this for 12 years, he said, but nothing comes close to how beautiful you are right now. She pulled him down to her. Then stop imagining and make it real. What followed was a claim in every sense. When their eyes met, Ophelia saw everything. The boy he'd been, the man he'd become, the devotion that had driven him to build a world just for her. Mine, Hudson breathed against her neck, his control fracturing. Say it, Ophelia. Say you're mine. Yours, she gasped, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her whole body trembling. And you're mine, Hudson. That goes both ways. His laugh was broken, relieved, and he kissed her like he was drowning, and she was air. Always have been, Pookie. Later, when they lay tangled together, breathless, Hudson pulled her against his chest. She reached for the emerald ring on the nightstand, sliding it back onto her finger, where it belonged. We need new terms, Hudson said quietly. The old contract, the acquisition plan. We're burning all of it. This partnership is equal, or it's nothing. Equal? Ophelia lifted her head to look at him. Equal. His expression was serious, vulnerable. You have full control over your studio. I'll invest and provide resources, but creative decisions are yours. And we make decisions together. No more manipulation. No more secrets. Can you do that? She asked softly. Can you really give up control? Hudson was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he admitted. 12 years of obsession doesn't disappear overnight. But I'll try. For you, I'll try to be better. She kissed him, soft and sweet, tasting the promise on his lips. Then we'll figure it out together. Together, he agreed, pulling her closer, his arms wrapping around her like he'd never let go. And Ophelia, thank you. For what? For choosing me anyway, despite everything, despite knowing exactly how twisted I am. His voice cracked. You could have walked away. You should have. But you didn't. She settled back against his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing, the solid warmth of him beneath her. The emerald on her finger caught the light, and this time it didn't feel like a shackle. It felt like a promise, one they were both choosing to keep. We made a promise, Hudson, she whispered. And unlike you, I'm just now realizing it was never a joke to me either. His arms tightened around her, and in the darkness of his bedroom, surrounded by the city lights filtering through the windows, Ophelia finally felt like she'd come home. Even if home was complicated and messy and built on 12 years of obsession and devotion that blurred the line between love and madness, it was theirs, and that was enough. The flagship boutique was everything Ophelia had dreamed of. Her name, Ophelia Sanders, etched in gold above the entrance, proof that she'd built something real, something entirely hers. Tonight was the grand opening gala, and the space was packed with everyone who mattered in the fashion world. Ophelia moved through the crowd in a dress of her own design, deep sapphire silk that made the emerald on her left hand catch the light. She wore Hudson's ring by choice now. Somewhere in the past year, she'd fallen completely in love with him. From across the room, she felt his gaze. She always could. Hudson stood near the bar, talking to investors, but watching her with that possessive intensity. When their eyes met, he smiled, the smile reserved only for her. A year ago, that look would have terrified her. Now it just made her feel claimed in the best possible way. "Ophelia, darling," a client swept her into air kisses and enthusiastic praise about the new collection, and Ophelia let herself be pulled into conversation. This was her element now, her world, and Hudson had kept his promise. Every decision had been hers, every creative choice, every business move, every collaboration. He advised when she asked, supported unconditionally, but never controlled. It hadn't been easy. His instinct to manage everything had clashed with her need for autonomy. They'd fought, sometimes loudly, sometimes with cold silence. But they'd also learned to communicate and set boundaries. Therapy had helped. Hudson still tracked her location, but now she tracked his too. Equal surveillance, equal transparency. They'd done the work, together. And what emerged was a relationship built not on need or desperation, but on genuine choice and hard-won trust. An hour into the gala, Ophelia felt a familiar hand on her lower back. She didn't need to turn to know it was Hudson. "Come with me," he murmured against her ear. "I can't just disappear from my own opening. 5 minutes, Pookie, I need you." She let him guide her to a small coat-check room. The moment the door closed, he had her pressed against it, his mouth on hers. "You're stunning tonight," he breathed against her lips, his hands on her waist, respectful but possessive in that way she'd come to crave. "Watching you out there, owning that room. Do you have any idea what you do to me?" "Show me," she challenged, her fingers sliding up to his collar, and his eyes darkened in that way that still made her knees weak. The kiss deepened, became something more desperate, a reminder of the passion that had always existed beneath the complications. His hand slid up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with a tenderness that contrasted beautifully with the intensity of his kiss. "This year," Hudson said, when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, "was the hardest of my life. Learning to let go, to trust that you'd stay without me controlling everything. Ophelia, there were days I wanted to fall back into old patterns so badly it physically hurt. But you didn't," she said softly, her fingers playing with the collar of his shirt. "You fought for us the right way this time. We both did." "We fought a lot," he admitted with a rueful smile, and she laughed. "And we learned a lot." She kissed him softly. "Like how you stress bake when you're trying not to be controlling. Or how I shut down instead of communicating when I feel overwhelmed. We're still figuring it out, Hudson. But we're doing it together." He rested his forehead against hers, his hands gentle on her waist. "Best promise I ever enforced." Ophelia laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Best promise I ever made." They stayed like that for another moment, stealing time in the middle of her triumph before returning to the gala hand in hand. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of celebration and success, but Ophelia found herself counting down the hours until everyone left, and it was just them. Finally, near midnight, the last guest departed. Ophelia found Hudson on the vintage sofa, laptop out. She grabbed her sketchbook and curled up beside him. This had become their routine, working side by side in comfortable silence. Ordinary and extraordinary, all at once. "What are you working on?" she asked after a while, not looking up from her sketch. Acquisition proposal for a sustainable textile manufacturer in Italy, Hudson said, his fingers still moving across the keyboard. Then he glanced at her design. What about you? Spring collection. I'm thinking lighter fabrics, more movement. She showed him the sketch, a flowing dress with asymmetric layers, and he studied it with the same serious attention he gave his business deals. It's beautiful, he said, meeting her eyes. Very you. They lapsed back into silence, and Ophelia felt that deep contentment that came from being with someone who understood her completely. The boutique, the success, the recognition, it was all incredible. But these quiet moments, where Hudson was just hers and she was just his, was what she'd really been searching for all along. Hudson, she said softly. He didn't look up from his screen. I love you. Now he looked at her, setting the laptop aside completely, his full attention shifting to her in that way that still made her feel like the only person in the world. I waited 12 years for you, he said, pulling her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her waist, and she settled against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. The emerald on her finger caught the low light, and she thought about everything they'd been through, the breaking and the rebuilding. It hadn't been easy, and it probably never would be. Hudson would always have that instinct to control, to orchestrate, to make sure everything went according to his plan, and she would always push back, demanding space and autonomy and proof that she was a partner, not a possession. But they'd learned to navigate it together, to call each other out when old patterns emerged, to apologize when they crossed lines, to choose each other every day, not because of some promise made at 18, but because they genuinely wanted to. And I'd wait 12 more, Ophelia whispered, tilting, her head up to kiss him. Hudson's arms tightened around her, and she felt him smile against her lips. You won't have to, Pookie. I'm not going anywhere. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, and the quiet satisfaction of having built something real. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside the boutique, surrounded by fabric and dreams made real, they proved that sometimes the promises we make as kids are the ones that matter most. She'd turned 30 alone in her studio, surrounded by fabric and unfulfilled dreams. Now, at 31, she was surrounded by everything she'd ever wanted. Success on her own terms, a boutique with her name in gold, and a man who'd built an empire just to make sure she'd never have to choose between her art and her survival. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated, but it was theirs, and that was more than enough. Have you ever made a childhood promise that changed your life? Did they remember it? Like Hudson, or try to forget it? Like Ophelia? Tell me in the comments, and thank you all for staying with me till the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.